Hello, everyone. Greg Michlig here, President and CEO at CUInsight.com. And on this episode of Three Questions, it's a pleasure to welcome Rebekah Higgins, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for Synergent. Rebekah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm sure everyone's eager to hear about the valuable insights you have to share. So, with that, let's get to those three questions. What is a current fraud trend you're seeing that credit unions should be aware of?
I think the most common fraud trend that we're seeing today is actually man in the middle or account takeover fraud. We've experienced this quite frequently over time, a lot of different varieties of it, a lot of different flavors of it. But for the most part, that seems to be most of the reports from credit unions come from some type of incident that involves somebody pretending to be somebody else that they're not.
Can you provide a scenario that kind of illustrates how this type of fraud is being seen? And, what are the fraudsters doing to commit this type of fraud?
Sure. We actually just had a recent scenario that impacted a few of our credit unions that was orchestrated, we believe, probably through some sort of data breach. So fraudster obtains the personal information of members of credit unions, financial institutions, just general consumers. And then from there, they go and purchase card data and then combine that information. And sometimes they're accurate with their information, sometimes they're not. So the scenario we just experienced involved fraudsters pretending to be the financial institution's fraud department. So they get the members' account information, they send a text that pretends to be the fraud monitoring system. Those are pretty standard with all financial institutions. Some of these the members that were impacted, some of them were members of the credit union, some weren't even members of the credit union. So it's kind of this broad message that went out, and they hope for some luck, right? And that they match up with some of that information. So in this instance, they received the text that was the fraud, potential fraud, and then it got followed up with a phone call. When they received that phone call, the member, probably a little distracted at the same time, but also probably not aware of a normal protocol that happens with these calls because you don't receive fraud notifications every single day. So fraudster calls, pretends to be the financial institution, and then from there starts asking the member for their information. So ask them to, verify card number or provide card number. In this incident, they actually asked them to provide, they had the card number in some of these instances, but then they asked for the information that would be used to perform a transaction. So they asked them for like the expiration date, CVV2. A lot of these instances, they asked for the PIN, which was then provided. So they went, a lot of times in these instances, they will continue to ask questions until they hit that resistance where the member feels like, oh, okay, this is starting to feel a little off, right? And so they'll continue to ask those questions until they meet that resistance. So in a lot of these instances, they got to the point where they were able to have the member share their PIN number. In addition to that, they would also ask whether there were other members of the household that had debit cards with the financial institution. And then they provided all of that information as well. So once the information was provided, fraudster takes that. They were very calculated in what they did, meaning that the first test transaction they did, they went specifically to a large financial institution that my assumption is that they knew that they used tokenization to perform transactions on their ATM terminals. So these fraudsters didn't need a physical plastic. They put the cards into the digital wallet with Google Pay, Apple Pay. We saw a variety of both. Went to that ATM terminal, performed transactions because they had the PIN number because the member had provided it. Kind of use that as a test transaction. Obviously, you're able to get a balance from an ATM terminal, which then allowed them to go off and do other transactions. So we saw further PIN-based transactions that happened at local grocery stores or larger retailers in the area that were successful. Number one, because they had the PIN number, which fraud monitoring systems assume that that means that it's a legitimate transaction to some extent. But then they were doing just the fact that they were doing PIN-based transactions allows those models to score a little differently. They were also very smart to not stay and do multiple transactions at the same merchant. They went traveled to different places because so they had some awareness of what triggers those fraud warnings, and then what would make those members aware of those instances.
Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated, and I
Yeah.
know just being within the industry, I get, relatives, family members who they'll get those texts, right? And they'll say,
Yes.
"Hey, is this legit? It looks legit." And you kind of have to walk through the steps
Hmm.
to make sure that they're being mindful of what an actual alert may look like or how it should look versus what these fraudsters are pulling off these days. And with that in mind, I guess what steps can credit unions take to prevent this type of fraud?
Sure. Prevention, I think, is one thing. I think the best tool that they can use is to educate their members. I think explain to them how they will know that a legitimate request is coming from a credit union. But then, even in those situations where they are unsure, explaining to members that their best course of action would be to call the financial institution at that point. So pause that call, place a call back, and that's advice that a consumer could use for any type of interaction they're having, right? So you've got your cell phone account or your cable account, all of those places they could choose whatever partner that you're working with to try to pretend to be somebody else. So I think we focus a lot on the fact that it's the credit union setting the fraud alert, but just in general, educating members on how to legitimately field out those situations, how to react to them, maybe even implementing more tools that make those requests seem more legitimate. We're seeing a lot more of those requests coming through text and email, or we're seeing digital integrations between card control apps and digital providers. So in those instances, you can make a member feel a little bit more secure about who's sending those messages and where they're receiving them. So I think that's really where we take lead is really putting that notice out there, helping credit unions get those messages out through different avenues, whether it's through their website, whether it's through their home banking, mobile banking, or just in general, in-branch communications, things like that. I think that's the best way against it. Obviously, all providers have different tools that help if somebody does fall victim to those situations. When those transactions come through, there's a lot of tools out there, and I think they vary based on processor, but in general, I think they're pretty much the same, just little different nuances about them. But really leveraging those tools in the best way that you can, looking at those patterns and building rules around what you're seeing out there. And then also, I think talking to the larger credit union community about what they're seeing. You may not be experiencing a fraud situation today, but somebody else may be seeing that. It may hit you in 2 or 3 weeks, but you could prepare for it based on other credit unions experiences. So I think really communication and sharing those instances, and then at the end of the day, when dealing with a member in any type of fraud, there's a significant amount of empathy that you have to use in working with them. There's a level of shame, embarrassment that people fell through it. They don't feel like they made the smartest decision in sharing their information. And you want to make sure that you're encouraging people to share those instances with you so that you can help other members with them. And then I also think in some of those situations, it does resonate more to hear from a live person who fell victim to some of these things versus me as a professional and an expert sitting over here just telling you what to do. Sometimes I think there's some relevancy in hearing somebody who's just like you who fell for something, and maybe they can help others make better decisions based on their mishaps or missteps along the way.
No, that's great guidance. And before we wrap up, I just wonder if you have any final thoughts for the audience or any, asks of the viewers today.
I would just say, to share, I feel like a lot of times we're very proprietary about things that are happening. And I don't think fraud is one of those instances where we can be. So, I don't think anybody's asking anybody to share, trade secrets around, lending penetration or things like that. But I think that we all have a hand in fraud. And if we can find something that works, if we share that amongst the industry, then I think that we're ahead of the game. So, I would encourage everybody to just share and make sure that everybody's aware of what's happening around them so that we can have the opportunity to make a difference and to help members not be impacted by a lot of these situations that are out there.
Well, very good. I thank you, Rebecca. It's been a pleasure to connect with you, and I appreciate you taking the time to join me. And final thank you to all who tuned in for this Three Questions video interview. We'll see you next time.